And for more insight into the jobs report and the U.S. economy, let's bring in Ted Rossman. He is a senior industry analyst at bankrate.com and creditcards.com. Ted, thank you so much for joining our program today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Well, first of all, I want to get your reaction to today's report. Are you surprised by the numbers here? And what does this say overall about the state of the U.S. economy? Should we be overly excited here?
You know that saying about being shocked but not surprised? I mean, I think it does fit here because on the face of it, yeah, it is a surprisingly strong report. Although, as your piece mentioned, maybe we shouldn't be surprised because we've had 13 straight months now that have exceeded expectations. It's really remarkable when we think about the job market and consumer spending, just how resilient these trends continue to be. It's like, what recession, right? Now, of course, there are some underlying issues that people are worried about, but this data did come in surprisingly strong, I think, and it's really a pattern. We've had a string of surprisingly positive reports here.
And Ted, let's get a little bit more specific. What kind of jobs are being added and in what sectors in particular?
Good quality jobs, professional and business services were number one. Healthcare was number two. Remember there was a time earlier in the COVID recovery that a lot of the jobs coming back were in leisure and hospitality. And, not to put down that sector, but those do tend to be lower paying jobs. But right now it is sort of the so-called white collar, better paying industries. Even the beleaguered financial sector, which has had all these bank failures lately, even that sector gained more than 20,000 jobs in the month. So I really think across the board, a lot of strength here. One weakness was the revisions to the past 2 months that actually cost us about 150,000 jobs in total. So that was a little bit of a damper, but the most recent month came in well above expectations. And, to my surprise, the markets reacted well to this. I actually thought this might be one of these good news is bad news things in the sense that does that maybe lead the Fed to hike more? At least so far, people are still banking on a pause at the next meeting.
And Ted, the report also showed that wages are also growing higher than expected. But the question is, are they keeping up with inflation and the cost of living? Those are still big concerns here in the U.S.
They are. And this, too, is one of these conundrums in the economy because as workers, we love to get paid more. Wage growth came in at 4.4% in today's report, and that compares to 4.2% for core PCE inflation. So, that's actually slightly positive. I guess we'll take the victory where we can get it by a couple of tenths. But I do worry that wage growth does have this so-called wage price spiral. So does that incentivize companies to charge more for goods and services? That's the downside. We love to get paid more, but we don't want to pay more when we buy things. And corporate profits have been remarkably resilient. There's kind of a growing feeling, I think, that all these price increases are going to be a little bit tougher for the Fed to tamp down. So we'll see. I think there are still a number of key open questions ahead, not to mention the whole debt ceiling mess. But for now, the best guess seems to be that the Fed is still going to pause, at least for a bit.
Well, experts are also warning that we are not out of the woods yet. It's always good to be a little bit cautionary about these kinds of numbers. Jobless claims have been starting to inch up. And so what's the prospect for further layoffs that we saw previously?
The layoffs that we're seeing have largely been concentrated in tech and media, but what I think is interesting and heartening is that people seem to be finding re-employment very quickly, even in those embattled sectors, because we're really not seeing a demonstrable change in weekly jobless claims or continuing claims. The unemployment rate, as we mentioned, actually edged down. So I think overall the job market is a source of strength. And even though consumer confidence is more embattled, I think that really has to do with inflation. People are working, their wages are going up. That's helping keep people on track.
There's also, you mentioned this, the debt ceiling deadlock currently in Washington, and also the banking crisis that we've seen in the past few months, and the possibility the U.S. could go into default. So there's these other concerns that are still being raised. So is there still, a cause for concern that we still need to be a little bit more tamped down in our optimism here?
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of things to worry about when it comes to inflation and the debt ceiling. To be optimistic, maybe these things get resolved just fine. I mean, maybe the Fed can engineer a soft landing. We still think, and the economists that we surveyed still think there's about a 2 in 3 chance of a recession within the next year, but there's a good chance it could be a short, mild recession. On the debt ceiling, I still think there's a lot of optimism that that gets resolved. It may come down to political brinksmanship. I think there's a growing feeling that there may be kind of a kick the can down the road extension of at least a few months, especially now that the so-called X date when the government might run out of borrowing power might be as early as June 1st. I do think there's a growing feeling that maybe they push that out a few months. It doesn't resolve the problem long term, but I don't get the sense that markets or investors are getting particularly worried as of yet, but certainly an important issue to keep tabs on.
All right, and we know you will. Ted Rossman, thank you so much for breaking this all down for us.
No problem. Thank you.